right, let's officially get started. Our first form that we're covering is our wildfire disaster advisory. When it comes to wildfires, we have two regular disclosures. This one is our blanket wildfire disaster advisory. There's also a fire hardening disclosure and advisory. The fire hardening one is only if the property is in a high or very high fire hazard severity zone. Then you would use both of them. If it's not in a high or very high fire hazard advisory zone, then you're going to use our fire hazard zone. You're going to use just the wildfire disaster advisory. So I like to, with all my listings, which is why it's in the seller forms, I like to include this, even though it is only signed by the buyer themselves. The seller does not sign this one. I like to take all of my disclosures and upload them to a HomeLight listing management file for all of my listings. This is one of those forms that I upload to make sure that the buyers had a chance to review it prior to writing an offer. So the idea behind this one is it's for use with properties in and around areas affected by wildfire, which, let's just be honest, that is all of California at this point. So every property gets one of these, whether they're in city or out of town. It just says buyer or tenant is aware that as a result of recent wildfire disasters, there are current and unresolved health and safety concerns related to the aftermath and cleanup of wildfire disaster areas, as well as unknown and possible future concerns related to rebuilding of infrastructure in the affected areas of the wildfires. Unfortunately, the impact of wildfires has not been limited to the fire areas themselves. Many areas have had air quality impacted by smoke and air particles from distant fires. Additionally, fires continue to occur in previously unaffected areas. Fires may be an issue throughout the state of California. See, even if it was just that at the top, we've covered our basis there with disclosure. But then section 2 goes into some of our concerns and issues. It's a non-exhaustive list that represents concerns and issues that may impact the buyer or tenant decisions about purchasing, leasing property impacted by wildfire disaster, both currently and in the future. It is not intended to be, nor can it be, a checklist for all issues that might arise when purchasing or leasing property impacted by wildfire disaster. Concerns and issues include, but are not limited to, insurance-related issues such as past claims, the importance of identifying the insurability of the property, and the availability and cost of insurance as early as possible in the process. That now is a contingency as part of the regular residential purchase agreement. It wasn't that way until about a year and a half ago, I think, is when they introduced that as a separate contingency. It used to just be part of the inspection contingency. Lot clearing and requirements, toxic material analysis, debris removal requirements, whether the home has been fire hardened, and if so, to what extent, to help reduce the risk of structure catching fire, local, state, federal requirements for cleanup and building approvals, air quality, soil quality, and any other environmental or personal health concerns, even after a wildfire event has ended, timelines, costs, and requirements when obtaining required permits for building and utility installation, availability of access to electricity, gas, sewer, and other public utility services, water delivery, potability, septic and sewer design, requirements and construction costs, potential redesign of streets and infrastructure, including possible eminent domain, land condemnation and acquisition, inconvenience and delays due to road construction and unavailability of various goods, systems, and services, and impact that federal, state, and local disaster declarations have on material prices, costs, and rent. So those are some of the concerns and issues. For the most part, most of our buyers are just going to be concerned with our insurance-related issues if they're not buying a property that has been burned. That's where the concern lies. Buyer tenant advisory. The buyer or tenant is advised to check early in your transaction to determine whether you can obtain insurance on the property. Investigate to your own satisfaction any and all concerns of buyer tenant about the intended use of the property. That the area of wildfire disaster will likely be under construction for a protracted period of time after the fire, and buyer and tenant may be inconvenienced by delays, traffic congestion, noise, dust, intermittent utility availability. That due to extraordinary catastrophe of a wildfire, there may be changes and variations in local, state, or federal laws, codes, and requirements throughout the ongoing process of planning and rebuilding in the wildfire disaster area. that some insurers have reduced or canceled offerings for fire insurance and increased costs that impact buyers' tenants' ability to afford or requalify for loans or meet income ratio for rentals. That if you are not able to obtain fire insurance and have removed the insurance contingency, you may be in breach of the purchase or rental agreement. And then section 4 is a list of resources, a non-exhaustive list of potential resources provided as a starting point for buyer-tenant investigations and not as an endorsement or guarantee of what any federal, state, county, city, or other resource will provide complete advice. And so it lists all of those there and lets the buyer know that they should check with local municipalities for additional resources. Section 5 is our fire hardening and defensible space advisory. The California law requires certain disclosures be made concerning a property's compliance with safeguards that may minimize the risk of a structure on the property catching fire. That's called fire hardening. That an agreement be reached concerning compliance with requirements that the area surrounding structures be maintained to minimize the risk and spread of wildfires. That's your defensible space. The fire hardening and defensible space laws only apply if, among other requirements, the property is located in either a high or very high fire hazard severity zone. If there exists a final inspection report covering fire hardening or defensible space compliance, such report may need to be provided to the buyer. And that would be your CAR Forms FHDS, fire hardening and defensible space advisory. I think I misnamed it earlier. And again, that's only for properties in high or very high fire hazard zones. So that's really, those fall kind of out in the country and usually out in the country near the hillsides. Where to locate information? Seller has an obligation to determine if compliance with the fire hardening and defensible space requirements are applicable to seller and the property. It may be possible to determine if a property is in a high or very high fire hazard severity zone by consulting with a natural hazard zone disclosure company and reviewing the company's report. This information may also be available through a local agency where this information should have been filed. Even if the property is not in either of those zones specified above, or if the seller is unable to determine whether the property is in either of those zones, if the property is in or near mountainous areas, forest-covered lands, brush-covered lands, grass-covered lands, or land that are covered with flammable material, a seller may choose to make the disclosures because a buyer might consider the information material. Reports in the seller's possession that materially affect the value and desirability of the property shall be delivered as provided in the agreement. And buyer-tenant acknowledgement. Just buyer-tenant understands that real estate agents and real estate brokers have no authority or expertise in providing guidance through the process of investigating the concerns described herein. Buyer and tenant has an affirmative duty to exercise reasonable care in protecting themselves. So again, I would include this with all of my listings as part of the disclosures, even though my sellers don't actually sign it. If the property is in a high or very high, then we would need this form along with our HDS form. And if you want to know, there's 2 easy ways to find out if a property is in a high or very high fire hazard zone. One of them is that you order an NHD report as part of that disclosure process. They will tell you. The second is if you go onto Berries and you go into the map search and then you go into layers, you can actually overlay the fire hazard zones on top of the Berries map for most areas covered, well, by all areas covered by Berries, I believe covers it. Most areas into the Sacramento also have that information, but you can overlay that state fire hazard zone map, which will tell you which zone the property is in. Any questions about this form?
Do we have access to these forms?
This form is going to be in your CAR Forms library. So when you log into car.org, you go to transactions, you have to make sure you log in or click on it again. It's an orange button, and then it'll open up this new window with your CAR form. So yes, you do have access to these. All right, fabulous. That brings us to the end of our forms for today. I hope that was useful. I hope you feel a little bit more comfortable using some of these forms that we don't see on a regular basis and using some of the forms that we should be seeing more regularly that we're not seeing on a regular basis to make those part of your regular practice. If you guys have any questions, holler at me again next week. We'll be here at 9 o'clock. We have our Staying Out of Court with Robert Brand. He's fabulous. Join us for that one. It'll be on Zoom. And hold on, I've got something in the chat box. Oh, if you want to suggest a training, we're getting ready to put together our fall training schedule. There's a link in the chat box you can click on to make recommendations of trainings that you would like to see. Watch for a survey to come out in the Facebook group. It may also come out via text as well, asking for what days and times you prefer for trainings, so that as we put together the new schedule, we try to accommodate as many people as possible. Thanks everyone for joining me today, and have a fabulous day. We'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.